One of the first definitive accounts of Indian history writing was by James Mill, who wrote the history of British India. And in that he completely berated India, Indian culture, and that was the idea. Even when we were a slave nation, there was space for an alternative version of history. But ironically, after becoming an independent country, the space for an alternative narrative was completely snuffed out. Congress had outsourced the entire project of particularly history to the Marxist and leftist ideology. Rewriting or retelling history from an Indian perspective is a very legitimate action which is being done worldwide. It's only that when it is being done in India, it gets dubbed as right-wing political propaganda and Sanghi and this and that. Whereas all over the world, reclaiming your past is something that is done with a lot of pride. A historian needs to be a very, very humble person because what you are seeing is a very small fraction of what the ultimate truth as it happened actually is. All these different perspectives need to come to make a balanced opinion of what history needs to be.
For joining us for our second episode on the NIJ podcast with Ananya, and a warm welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. So, I'm really excited and probably a little nervous while introducing you to the most popular historian that we have today, Dr. Vikram Sampath. Dr. Sampath is the author of 8 acclaimed books including Splendours of Royal Mysore, My Name is Gauhar Jaan, the most recent Brave Hearts of Bharat, and of course, the national bestseller 2-volume biography of Savarkar. A Sahitya Akademi awardee, Dr. Sampath is also a fellow at the prestigious UK's Royal Historical Society. So without losing any other minute, let us dive in. Thank you so much, Dr. Sampath, for making the time today.
Thank you, Ananya ji. And let's, for the conversation, keep it without the G and the doctor.
Acha. So Vikram
and Ananya.
Vikram and Ananya. Let's get started. Okay. Yes. So shuru se shuru karte hain. Before we went live, we spoke about, how you were doing a job at HP, Citibank, GE, that part of your life, and then you got into history writing. And then you told me that no, it was when I was 12. Yeah. So how did that happen? How did a 12-year-old Vikram Sampath decide to become a historian?
Well, there's one word in English called serendipity. Happy accidents which happen in life. I think this was one such serendipitous moment, and usually I think I should credit Mr. Sanjay Khan for my literary and history journey, because I don't know how you would remember, we were almost of the same age, but for the young listeners they may not. But in those days there was this Sword of Tipu Sultan on Doordarshan, the only channel that we all saw, which was produced by Sanjay Khan, and in that serial Tipu, to highlight Tipu and his father Hyder Ali, who were actually usurpers of the Mysore throne, from the Hindu dynasty of the Wodeyars. They had shown Tipu in a very wonderful light, but at the same time the Mysore royal family was shown in an extremely poor manner. If you remember, the king was shown like this obese man who was dancing along with the court dancer, Nartaki, hum aapko dikhate hain kaise nachna hai, and all those type of things. And the Queen was one of those vamps, from the typical Ekta Kapoor serials, always conniving, conspiring type of a person. So about that, there were protests in different parts of Karnataka because though, it's been 70 years since the royal family itself has ceased to exist, even now, there is so much of respect and, reverence for the Wodeyar dynasty, because a lot of the foundations of modern Karnataka, today, southern Karnataka particularly, Bangalore is the IT center, the knowledge center, all of that, the foundations were laid by the Wodeyars. The Indian Institute of Science was established by them. Yeah, so by a queen who was hardly, she didn't even have education herself. There was a competing bid for the IISc from Roorkee. Very quickly, she granted money and ensured that the project came to Bangalore. And the result that it had in making Bangalore a knowledge center and so on. Similarly, the Krishnaraj Sagar Dam, which is there now, which was built during their time, it was the second largest dam in the whole of Asia, in the whole world, and the largest in Asia when it was built. And even now, people of southern Karnataka are beneficiaries of drinking water from that dam. Bangalore was the first city in India to be electrified in 1905. So there were so many such spin-offs of their rule. And then to show that dynasty in this manner, naturally upset a lot of people, and this was a completely apolitical kind of an outburst. No, it was not led by any political party or group. And I was this 12-year-old boy then, who, to confess, I hated history in school.
You hated history. Don't say that. Okay.
No, the way it is taught, it's such a boring and pedantic way. Just ratta maro, unnecessary details, dates.
किस साल कौन आया था?
कौन आया? क्या फर्क पड़ता है? Who comes when? And the wars people fought, and unnecessary, very insipid kind of details. And most history classes, I would get the maximum punishment, including kneeling down outside class. I remember once the teacher had even taken a scale and broken on my palm, and the piece of splinter had gone inside. Really? And that was the amount of hatred, and my mother had to come to school and literally create a ruckus saying, what if my son doesn't know history? That doesn't mean he has to be malhandled this way. So for someone who was growing up like that, this serial and the kind of protests, somewhere they were making a deep impression in my mind. So it was a mix of curiosity, I think intense curiosity, and also this quest to learn, which led me on a completely self-motivated, self-initiated, more importantly self-funded project, which every vacation meant going to Mysore. And there's some destiny which plays, because me or my family, we have no connection to Mysore per se. We've been in Bangalore, but so every time we would go there, and it became a family project. My parents would accompany me. My maternal grandmother, I couldn't understand and read Kannada then, so she would help me, translate some of the stuff. And meeting members of the royal family, some people from the archives there, libraries, old timers, never with the intention that this is going to become a book or something. Svanta Sukhaya, as they say, just a joy of exploration. And I would maintain all those details in a little logbook. Those days I was also good at sketching and painting. So sitting in the palace, I would make portraits of all the Maharajas and so on. So junoon jo kehte hain, somewhere that wo junoon chad gaya tha, and this madness continued for 10 long years, including when I was preparing for my +2 and my entrance exams and my engineering later in BITS Pilani and all that. So, but Mysore bug, as they said, it had bitten very deep. And at the end of that long journey, I realized that there was not a single book written on the Wodeyars in the modern times. This was one of the longest reigning royal houses of India. They ruled for 600 years, from 1399 to 1947, when India got independent. It was the first kingdom to actually sign the accession to accede to the Indian Union. Without any neighboring Hyderabad, you had all, Sardar Patel had to send a force, but Mysore was a peaceful transition. So despite all these achievements, there was no book on them. And that's one of the banes of Indian historiography, where the south of India is completely neglected. We have a very Delhi-centric kind of a narrative. South India, Northeast India, all these don't feature much. So then, after putting so much of material, what started as interest only in that one king and queen, then becoming an interest in the entire family. And it was a story of modern Karnataka in the making. So that's when I decided to put all of this together in the form of a book. Accidentally, it came out in 2008, about 16 years ago.
And what were you doing at that time? Like, what was your day job like?
Oh God, horrible. I was working initially with G Money, then Citibank and Hewlett Packard, looking at those Excel sheets, calculating profit and loss. It was finance and risk management. Actually wondering, am I going to die one day just calculating the profits of an American firm? And is my legacy just going to be that much? So I think I'm actually, when I look back, there's so much gratitude that very few people get the opportunity to make their passion their profession. And so while I thought this was just a one-off incident, this book came out in 2008, it came out to good reviews and so on. And even I thought this is a one-off thing. I'd spent 10 years to bring out this one book. And that's it, that's the end. But I think destiny had other plans, and I went on to write more. Also gave me the courage to leave my corporate career and pursue a PhD in history, which is what gave me the independence to give up the corporate job and pursue my passion.
Right. I mean, to your point, what's your message to a lot of, say, aspiring historians, who want to write about unsung heroes, who want to write about neglected chapters of history, and who may be doing different day jobs, right? Or may not have enough resources. Like, what's really your message to them to sort of bring it together and follow your passion?
I think today, this was 15-20 years ago when we were, I think, growing up and so on. That time we had to tread the beaten path, right? I mean, if you're good in studies, you do science and medicine and engineering and all these things. Today, if a young person has an interest in even the humanities or history, I think first of all they should happily pursue it, get some kind of formal training or whatever academically and so on, because I think some kind of formal training does a whole lot of difference. I mean, I see my own books before my PhD, and after that I see the difference in how you the research methodology and how you write and put your arguments together. But if that is not possible and you actually have a day job and then want to balance it, I think writing can coexist with a regular day. Yeah, everything else. But the research needs to be extremely meticulous. I think they need to put in that hard work. Fiction is comparatively simpler, where you can sit and imagine what you want and write. Whereas if you're particularly writing history and history of characters and unsung heroes, as you mentioned, the amount of effort you need to put, research, is a lot, and for that you'll have to put in the hard work.
What do you think, for all these claims that that exist in the dominant narrative that non-left ecosystem does not have academic scholars, they do not have intellectuals? I mean, because that's really been probably the case, or probably the narrative you've been like. Do you think you've been able to make some inroads?
No, that's it's both true and not completely true also. Why? I'll explain why. Because I think a lot of scholarship, particularly in the academia, depends on patronage. It depends on opportunities that are given. And for the longest time in India, I think the thraldom with which all the humanities and history writing also was held by an ideology. It was so ideologically captive, and the Congress had outsourced the entire project of particularly history to the Marxist and leftist ideology. And so if you did not toe that line, many people paid a very heavy price with their livelihoods. Fellowships would be denied, careers were destroyed of so many people, and celebrated historians including the likes of ARSC Majumdar and others, the manner in which they were shunted out of government committees which were set up to write the history of India, only because he said, I'm not going to toe the Nehruvian line of what the history of the freedom struggle needs to be. It's not just eulogizing Gandhi and the non-violent movement. There were different other streams, and he was quite he was making an objective critique of Gandhi and his role itself in the freedom struggle. That was not tolerated, and he was removed from the committee, and in his place a bureaucrat who was very pliant was put in, who had no expertise also in the subject, which was a clear message to all the other historians of the time that unless you toe this path, then you cannot, you will have it will have repercussions on your life. Someone like R.C. Majumdar didn't depend on state largesse. He managed independently, but not all other historians could do that. So that's why I think over a period of time, it was very difficult for people from the non-left dominant ideology to actually foster any kind of scholarship on their front. And then first of all you deny opportunities, then you blame them saying you have no expertise. There also I don't know how much it is completely true, because maybe the Lutyens circuit, which is not just the geographical area in Delhi but across cities, the state of mind that it is, English speaking, very prolific, media savvy, feted abroad, those kind of left scholars are what people saw and identified. But in the hinterland, in various parts of the countryside in India, those who are non-left probably spoke in Hindi or Sanskrit or Kannada, Marathi, Tamil. These would not come into the limelight per se, and so then you say they don't even exist. So the English speaking modern elite, maybe they were not there, but there were a lot of, they were and are a lot of those scholars. Today the best thing, Ananya, is that nobody depends on state largesse. Even there have been so many people of my generation, our generation, who are coming out from outside the system.
Right.
We don't depend upon either the government or a political party or even a university setup to get our works out. We are able to publish books through social media, through podcasts, through the internet and all of this. We can get our voice across to millions of people. So why do you need anyone's largesse or anyone's patronage per se? So information is so much more democratized and accessible today. Of course, it brings in its fold all kinds of riffraff. Everyone is a scholar. On Twitter, everyone is a historian. So that is a part of the churning process. I think there's an intense manthan, samudra manthan that's going.
At its own pace.
Poison is going to come out. There's going to be amrit also. And I think a mixture of both is what is happening now.
Right. Give us more context on how power dynamics of, the government of that time really played into how history was written, because, a lot of the youth thinks of, history as some sort of an absolute truth, the way it's been written in NCRT books. And then when you talk about democratizing it,
No, that's a great question, because, even the history of history writing, if you see, even for the longest time, people who came from outside, Al-Baruni, from Al-Baruni down to the East India Company, everyone said the Indians or the Hindus, as they called all of us, do not have the idea of history writing, that we don't even understand what history writing means. But we probably didn't subscribe to the Western concept, or our contemporaries at that time, ancient India, were the Greeks. So Herodotus or whoever, their way of keeping records or writing, we probably didn't have. But we had our own, idea of what history needs to be, what is its purpose to write that history, what is its utilitarian, concept, and we maintained records in different ways. Everything may not have been written down in a particular way as the West did, but our history exists as living, documents, as inscriptions on temples. In the Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur, if you go, it's a 1,000+ year old temple built in 1010 by Rajaraja Chola. On the temple walls, you have the names of about 400 Devdasis who were dancing and singing in the temple, their names, their addresses, their mother's name, how much salary was given to them. All of this documented. And you say Indians don't know how to keep history and documentation.
Just because it's not in a book.
Not in the format that they have. Similarly, go even to the northeast. You have Assam, where right from, the times BC, there's a written documentation of all Assamese history. And from the 13th century, when the Ahom started ruling there, you have all their history documented in what are known as the Burunjis. Now, these two are seldom accessed by people. Kashmir has had a very, very well written, documented history of keeping social, political, cultural lives through the Kalhana's work, Rajatarangini and so on, which up to the invasion by Akbar, it has a complete detail with addendums by Jonaraja and several others who have added to the main body of Rajatarangini. So we've always maintained records, but in different manner. I think India has always had a very unique response in every aspect of life. We have our own unique philosophy, and so it is when it comes to historiography. Now, when the British came, and I think they, coupled with the missionaries and so on, the idea was to belittle the culture, belittle the land, and actually say that these people did not even have a sense of history, and this whole myth of the Aryan invasion created to show us that you are always destined to be ruled from people from outside.
So could you break that down for us? The myth of Aryan invasion.
No, I mean, it was all based on the fact that just because somebody thought that the languages, Sanskrit was very similar to some of the European, Proto-European languages, our ancient ancestors must have invaded from there, and they were a Mool Nivasi somewhere here, and they pushed them down. Now recent genetics or linguistic studies, all of this have shown, there have been so many scholars who've done work on this, right from Dr. Konrad Elst to Dr. Shrikant Talagiri and others who have, and linguists and geneticists like Professor Neeraj Rai. All of these people have done work to show that this is a myth. And it's increasingly, it was a colonial project. But at that time, I think one of the first definitive accounts of Indian history writing was by James Mill, who wrote The History of British India. And in that, he completely berated India, Indian culture. And that was the idea, right? And the colonial project was that, like Macaulay's whole minutes which are there also meant only that the whole purpose of English education is to create a vast body of interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, who are Indian in blood, color and skin color and all of that, but they're English in their tastes, opinions, morals and intellect. So that project, history writing also became a victim of that larger project. And so James Mill, when he did this, the interesting part was, this is the 19th century we're talking about. India was a colonized country then. Even then, particularly from Maharashtra, you had a lot of native historians there who challenged James Mill and his hypothesis, and they wrote, because we were colonized, you couldn't openly write books or articles refuting a colonial master. So they wrote anonymous letters to the newspapers refuting each and every bit of what James Mill had, his diatribes against India. And these were written as responses. The first Hindu, the second Hindu, that's how they addressed their letters and sent it out.
Have you been able to trace who?
Yeah. No, nobody. We wouldn't know. These are anonymous.
Yeah.
But they were like, and that probably gave birth to what is the nationalist school of historiography. And Maharashtra, Bengal, all these places were where a lot of them came from. V.K. Rajwade, Bhandarkar, Jadunath Sarkar, R.C. Majumdar, Neelkant Shastri from South India. All these people who created this vast corpus of a nationalist historiography as against Oriental, colonial kind of a history. But the saddest part and the ironical part is, even when we were a slave nation, there was space for an alternative version of history. But ironically, after becoming an independent country, the space for an alternative narrative was completely snuffed out. And I very openly lay that blame on the larger, Nehruvian project post-independence, where, as I said before, when the ruler sets an agenda that this is what I want, the narrative to be there, a historian becomes a chef. नमक मिर्च स्वाद अनुसार, तो जितना master बोलता है डालो, we will put only that much. So uncomfortable chapters to be removed, freedom movement to be shown in a certain way, certain communities to be demonized, certain communities not to be demonized, all these agenda driven things. And the discovery of India that he wrote becomes like a template for all the other
things to
follow. And as I said, if you lost your job and you know that this is the master's template, everyone follows that same line, and they got plum postings, they got all their accolades and honors, and that's how academic history and what students read in schools and colleges became. So alternative voices disappeared. Of course, there were other branches of this larger Marxist umbrella, subaltern history and so on, voices from the people, Professor Nikhilesh Guha and so many others who wrote on this. But still, despite that, the role of women or the role of tribals, all the tribal history or their tribal participation in the freedom movement, these things, the sannyasi rebellion that happened, all these never, they're part of the subaltern, but they never came into the larger, mainstream narrative itself. And with establishment of organizations like ICHR, where completely, I think the handover was complete to the Marxist. And 2-3 education ministers also whom we had were people who had that agenda in mind to ensure that a certain narrative, is perpetuated. And I think it is sadly this very, very distorted, contorted version that we now read as gospel truth in Indian history. Whereas, I always say, history to me is that metaphor of when we were growing up. Remember, we had this poem of the blind man and the elephant.
Yes.
So there's an elephant, literally the elephant in the room is history, Indian history. And all the blind men are touching different parts of that elephant, and they're asked to say, how does the elephant look? Someone says it looks like the trunk, someone thinks it's like the tusk, someone touches the tail, someone touches the body. Each one is telling the story from their perspective. All of them are correct, all of them are incorrect also, because the final description of that elephant is a sum of the parts of all their descriptions. So similarly, history, when you nobody, I think a historian needs to be a very, very humble person, because what you are seeing is a very small fraction of what the ultimate truth as it happened actually is. So all these different perspectives need to come to make a balanced opinion of what history needs to be. So unfortunately here that's not happened. Alternative schools, alternative voices have never been encouraged, particularly in academia, and that becomes the and I talk about academia only because that is the one that is perpetuated to the youngsters, aspiring, IAS officers, all of them are going to read these books, and that is what is the gospel history of India as it exists. So where there is no space for anything outside what a particular group perpetuates as the truth. So I think nowadays that is being challenged. This well-guarded fortress is being attacked constantly by a lot of people who are coming from the outside, and hence the repercussions, the counterattacks. It's a well-guarded fortress for 75 years. So if anybody tries to move you from your turf, it is natural that there's going to be a counter backlash.
So then tell us about, say, 5 chapters that you think are missing from, say, what you call as the Marxist historiography. Like, what are those 5 history chapters that we are not reading?
Well, there would be so many of them. I would say the kind of defects itself which they perpetuate, history as class struggle. That's what we are always told. That's the Marxist, simple definition of what history is. It's always class struggle. People are always fighting with each other and so on. Now, they might have been, even in India, I mean, of course, we were colonized, we were invaded only because we were disunited, we were fighting with each other. All that is true. But then despite that, we had a kind of civilizational unity. Bharat Varsh, as it was conceptualized by our ancestors right from the Vishnu Puran. Uttaram yat samudrasya himadrashchaiva dakshinam varshatad bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. So between the Himalayas and the ocean, this whole landmass is Bharat Varsh. Varsha means the country. The nation is called Bharat Varsh, and its children are Bharatiyas. So this idea of a civilizational entity as being one was always there. So I think that aspect doesn't come through, and a lot of this, I mean, that's the constant fight, right? Even today in India, where are we a nation that was born on 15th August 1947 with only 75 years old, or are we a 5,000, 6,000 year old civilization? I think it's a mix of both. The modern Democratic Republic of India may have come now, but its roots were much more deep rooted. So these elements of Indian civilization and its connect to today's times also are achievements of the past for which we can be genuinely proud of. There's a thin line between being jingoistic and being genuinely proud of what our ancestors did. If you ask an Indian, tell me 4-5 things that you can be proud of for being an Indian, or what did your ancestors do in the field of, say, mathematics, or they discovered zero. Beyond that,
that's it.
Beyond, we don't know anything. But we did so many things. Our contribution to world knowledge, be it in sciences, in chemistry, alchemy, metallurgy, mathematics, medicine, surgery, so many fields, yoga, and our mind-body connection, philosophy, linguistics, Panini's grammar being, considered now to be so adaptable to even the computers and machine language and artificial intelligence today. So all of that is something that we need to know as Indians. Just saying Mera Bharat Mahan and singing patriotic songs doesn't help. What is it? What is this Mahanta for?
What is it for?
What is it for that you can be proud?
Yep.
That is what our children need to know when they read their history books. The third one is, of course, things like, creating schisms where none exist. The most popular Marxist trope is that, when you bring about the uncomfortable truths related to the Islamic conquest of India, which is a fact, and you don't have to make any bones about that and be apologetic about anything, because it's a undeniable truth that some of the worst excesses were, our people faced, our ancestors faced over the 1,000 years of Islamic rule in India. But anytime someone brings that, the counter is, but the Hindus and Buddhists, Hindus also persecuted the Buddhists, which is again, there's hardly or no evidence at all of this. The only thing they say is there are about 3 episodes, one with Pushyamitra Shunga and Mihrakula, another of Shashanka of the Gauhar dynasty in Bengal. That also many people say they also donated some things to some people and all these things, to stupas and Buddhist viharas. So, but you create this constant clash. First of all, people say there is nothing called Hindu. It came only in the 19th century by the British. Then you say Hindus and Buddhists were fighting with each other. So this is a kind of a very weird, you can't have it both ways.
Whenever it suits you.
Suits you. So these were all, we don't understand, they were all different schools of philosophy. Indian darshan only if we take, you had the Astik schools and the Nastik schools, those who believed in the primacy of the Vedas and those who did not. And among the Astiks you had the Nyaya, Sankhya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa and Vedanta. And Vedanta we had Dvait, Advait, Vishishtadvait, all of those. In the Nastik you had the Jain, Bodh and the Charvak, where Charvak said there is no God also, just keep drinking ghee and materialist kind of this thing. Enjoy life. There's no punarjanam and all that. So all of these people coexisted, and constantly there was intellectual fights among all of them. There may be some stray incidents of some violence between two, opposing intellectual views. But Tark, Vitark and Samvad, Vivad, just as Shankaracharya goes and defeats Mandan Mishra, in a long debate. It was all based on intellectual fights. So when he goes on Digvijay, that is not going with arms to kill someone. So Raja also used to have Digvijay. A spiritual teacher or a philosopher like Shankaracharya also had a Digvijay, where you convince another person to your intellectual viewpoint through your power of your arguments, not the power of your sword. So these subtleties are disregarded, and all these conflicts are sought to be created amongst our people. Then of course different parts of India don't get featured, Delhi centric. We would like to know about all the kingdoms and the peoples and the cultures, the languages, dialects, music, dance forms of South India, of Northeast India, different parts of the country. It has
to take a PS1 or PS2 to know about Chola history, for example.
Exactly. So all that is maybe the fourth. And the last one is, again, this slave mentality that is put into us. I was just talking to a friend who said, he just enrolled for the IAS exams, and he'd ordered all the books that are prescribed to read. And since you have been through that rut, you might actually relate to it. He said, when I read particularly the history curriculum, ordered all the books and read, it was almost like you'll start loathing India. That there's nothing. It's almost like you're reading it from a third person's perspective. It's not your country's story. There's a sense of loathing. And if these are the people who are going to be the bureaucrats who are going to govern this country,
that's the mindset you're preparing them for.
God help us. And so the slavish mentality, and also the thing that we always lost battles, an idea which I try to address briefly in my Brave Hearts.
So this brings me to the preface of your new book, Brave Hearts of Bharat, where you say, it quotes that until the lions have their own storytellers, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Why did you use this quote? And in the context of decolonizing history.
Yeah, and decolonization, we feel is something that's only India-centric. This quote is actually of Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. So worldwide, especially after the Second World War, when most countries got their freedom, Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia, even China, those which were earlier colonized by Western imperialists, who now became free, they said, we are going to look at our own history, our languages, our faiths, our culture through our own eyes, and not through a Western lens which is going to teach us how to understand ourselves. Because Ananya, the colonization has, in my view, three aspects to it, three dimensions to it. One is, of course, the political colonization, which is relatively easier to get rid of. It's not tough. I mean, it's not easy, but it's not that difficult also. After a lot of struggle, we also got our freedom, political freedom in 1947. And many other countries got it at that time. Economic subjugation, which the colonizer, imposed on you, raw materials taken from the colonies, finished products brought back and sold at double the price, and all of that, killing local industry, local, artisans, craftsmen, and overall GDP of the country itself coming down as a result. Loot of all even the word loot, they looted from us, right? The English LOOT is from the Hindi
Indian
loot.
root.
Yeah. So, and India with a GDP of share of the world share being 25% or so before the East India Company came. By the end of the British rule, it was less than 4%. So all our money went into building infrastructure and the handlooms in Manchester and all these places.
To further their objectives.
Their war efforts, our people were contributing. So the economic subjugation, exploitation, which also over a period of time you can get rid of. Today, India has surpassed her former colonial master. We've become the 5th largest economy. By 2030, I think we are poised to become the 3rd largest after US and China. So economically getting out of the rut is also difficult, but not impossible. The third dimension, the most difficult, is the cultural and intellectual subjugation, where over generations, as we spoke about Macaulay, the fact of looking at your own culture with a sense of inferiority, with being apologetic about it, heen bhavna, about your own, ancestors and your past, and disregard and disconnect from your own roots. That perpetuates so much more than the first two dimensions. And so world over, decolonization has not just meant removing the first two elements, but the third one too. And Chinua Achebe's statement there, in Africa, it's a big deal to tell them that, we are going to interpret our native faiths, which were all dismissed as pagan and so on, in our own ways. Our history we are going to write, because as George Orwell had said, he who controls the past controls the future. So it's history has been the handmaiden of the ruler, and so our colonial masters understood that well. To keep this nation in subjugation, we also need to write a history which will keep them subjugated. So rewriting or retelling history from an Indian perspective is a very legitimate action which is being done worldwide. It's only that when it is being done in India, it gets dubbed as right wing and
sort of political
propaganda and Sanghi and this and that. Whereas all over the world, reclaiming your past is something that is it's a very in thing and something that is done with a lot of pride.
People say India is becoming more tolerant, intolerant, whatnot, based on what sides of the debate they come from. But do you think we are more tolerant now to alternative narratives? And does that unsettle the dominant narrative, and then they spin the story to say that there's greater intolerance, whereas we are probably more tolerant now to all sides of the story?
I fully agree, because there's a democratization of information, as we spoke, and I think social media is the biggest leveler, where everyone has access to information and also an outlet to let your opinions out into the world. So it comes with its fair share of pros and cons. There's cacophony, there's, as I said, there's a churn going on there. But it gives all people an opportunity to voice their opinion. Information is accessible. Archives so many are digitized and online available. Entire books in PDF forms are available online. People get access to information right now. No one can complain that we don't have access. Right now, everyone has access to anything they need. So it doesn't remain the jurisdiction or proprietary property of a few people. And so actually there is a lot more tolerance when it comes to different viewpoints. Different kind of books are being written and published. 15 years ago, I don't think a mainstream publisher like what I have, Penguin, Random House India, would have even thought of publishing a 2-volume series on Savarkar of all the people. I often quote that incident. We talk of intolerance now, but in the Nehruvian era, someone of the eminence of Pandit Hridaynath Mangeshkar, lost his job in All India Radio only because he tuned Savarkar's poems in Marathi, Jayostute, Ne Majasi Ne, Parat Matrabhumila, and Lataji, Ashaji and all of them sang those songs. He lost his job. And Majru Sultanpuri was jailed for more than a year only because he called Nehru, Hitler's stooge or something like that. During the emergency, Kishore Kumar's songs were banned because he did not sing for a party function or some such thing. So, and the number of books that have been banned then, we banned satanic verses even before Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran banned it, and it's still not revoked even now. Lajja by Taslima Nasreen, so many of these books, scores and scores of books, films, all of these have been banned. In the last 10 years, I don't see any books having been banned. There are books of all hues, all, critical of the current dispensation or eulogizing the current dispensation or neutral to both. History books, particularly of all sides of the spectrum, coming out and people lapping it up. Similarly, films. You have all kinds of films, brought out. It's another issue that people are doing all this boycott, etc., which they have a legitimate right. It's their money, whether they want to see a film or not is their right. So, but I think there's a larger, so contrary to the canard that is spread, that suddenly India has become intolerant, I think we have a larger appetite. Whatever you want, you will get. Right. You want this side of the spectrum, you will get that also. You want that side of the spectrum, you will get that also. And that's how I think a good democracy needs to be, where difference of opinion, dissent, debate, discussion is what is the need of the hour. Unlike the leftist, this thing of cancel culture, where if you're deplatformed, you're cancelled, you are made a persona non grata, and there's a stigma attached, a label is put on your name, and you are ruthlessly pursued and persecuted.
Do you think there is hardly any space in between? I mean, there may be, there's this, of course, history is now also politically charged for various reasons. And then there are two extremes. One, which is, totally bashing the government and this cancel culture that you spoke about. And the other one may be, maybe say mindless jingoism. Where do you think we could find that space for objective understanding of Indian history without possibly falling prey to the politics around it?
I think it's very difficult, especially now. It's not only history, in everything. The place for nuance is gone. We live in an age of binaries. Either you're with, as George Bush had said, with me or against me. There's nothing like you can be a little bit of both. You can be supportive of the government on some issues. You can be very critical of them on certain other issues. Similarly, some other, political or ideological or subject viewpoint. Now, no, you have to belong to this camp or that camp. So I only see this getting worse with people having such strong polarized opinions. And I mean, for political reasons, so many people have lost their friendships and relationships and called off even, marriages and their dates only because the person belonged to another political, ideological viewpoint. So I think it's just getting extremely polarized, which is not good. As you said, the centrist space is what a lot of, at least the intellectual discourse needs to be. If you need to make an objective critique of anybody or anything, everything need not be ones and zeros. When it comes to history, I think there's lots of shades of grey.
Right. Another follow-up question. It's a common practice on social media if you're trying to, sort of talk about your civilizational heritage, or probably, talking about Indian history before the Mughals came in and so on and so forth. You're typically branded a Sanghi.
Yeah.
You may or may not know what, have anything to do with BJP or Sangha, whatever, so, maybe the case.
You're talking to one such.
So how does one escape this stereotyping? I mean, because a large part of what you do is bringing out objective aspects of Indian history which may have been untold. Yeah. So how do you depoliticize it and present facts as the way they are?
I think, so before I would be a lot more sensitive to such mindless criticism. As you said, I've not even attended a Sangh Shakha. I don't know what happens there. But then I get labeled as a Sanghi. So that is how it is. As I said, ones and zeros. You either have to belong to this or that. You may have your political viewpoint. You may have an electoral, affinity to some X or Y, which is your democratic right. But that need not color all aspects of your living and, your thought process. So today, I think if a historian needs to actually tell his or her views with courage, without thinking about this mindless trolling, labeling, persecution that happens, only that's the only way out for him or her to go about. Have the courage of conviction of your mind, of your strength, of your research, and the fact that you are trying to tell the truth as it is, as you see it. There is just one truth, but we are all seeing it in different ways. Ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. So we have to, I think, have that viewpoint and be a little less, grow a thicker hide and say, okay, kuch to log kahenge, logon ka kaam hai kehna. So otherwise it can get very, very demoralizing and very, frustrating that people who don't even know you personally, they attribute all kinds of motives. You're on some mythical paycheck coming from some government, like, where is the money? Honey, please show me. So all these criticisms apart, I think one just needs to, it's very difficult in these days to remain apolitical. You get sucked into the politics, whether you like it or not. So if I'm writing on a polarizing figure like Savarkar, I am certainly caught in the crossfire of both sides. And so those things are inevitable, but I think one needs to maintain a distance and equanimity from everyone, saying I'm not affiliated to any of these people. And the strength and the credibility of independence is, I think, so important, and one must, and at least I ferociously guard it.
True. I mean, 10 years ago, one would have not imagined that Bollywood would be making movies on Savarkar. Yesterday, I saw a reel or so on, Randeep Hooda coming out with a movie on Savarkar, and then Ram Charan also announced, from RRR fame, announced that he'll be doing a movie on Savarkar. So, I mean, you're definitely responsible for mainstreaming Savarkar in the Indian modern history. What's your take on Bollywood picking up, these mainstreamed now, so to speak, historical personalities and then putting them out on cinema?
It's a great trend, no doubt. But I must state on record, and I did that even on social media, because, people assume that these films that have been announced are some way inspired or adapted from my works, which have not been the case. And the filmmakers have not approached, at least me, for any kind of help or consultation or anything, which is perfectly fair. It's but it's a bane in India only, where abroad, in Hollywood and so on, a film director would actually be very proud that his or her film is based on a work of literature, particularly if it's a popular work, which, as you said, if my books on Savarkar have actually reached so many people and people identify one certain thing, it also gives the film a certain credibility to say that it's adapted on this. But here in India, sadly, filmmakers, either they don't want to spend that extra little money that they need to buy the rights of a book, and they say, oh, this is a public figure, everything is in the public domain, we did the research ourselves and all that, which is fair enough. I mean, there's no way I can prove to anyone that this is all my material. Savarkar was not my proprietary property. So one can do that. But the problem with that becomes that a lot of our historical movies, they end up becoming caricatures. You remember even Bajirao Mastani and all these. I mean, Peshwa Bajirao was much more than a lovesick Romeo, but the popular imagination in people's mind is him pining for Mastani and dying on the banks of some river. But I think he was someone who laid the foundations of the Maratha Empire. I don't know if all those important nuances came in the film. So historical accuracy when it comes to historical movies is very important. You can't take cinematic liberties so much with characters like this, who have had a role in shaping the country and its destiny and so on. Somebody else who's not so consequential or so on to the larger narrative of the country, maybe you can take some liberties, but not with people like this. So while it's good that all these are being made, I hope these films are not going to be, in the name of cinematic liberty, stretch facts, make up stuff,
far-fetched, actual historical
introduce
facts.
All kinds of fictional elements in it, bring a romance angle, unnecessarily have one heroine pining for Savarkar somewhere. All these type of things will probably do more injustice to him than, I come from Bangalore and I live in Bangalore, and the Karnataka government there didn't think it necessary to even ask me, or even I wouldn't have any problem if they used my entire 2 books when they were revising the history textbooks there. Instead, they, in their own wisdom, appointed somebody who made a lot of changes in the history textbooks. And the chapter on Savarkar ended up, it was said that it was a poetic metaphor that every morning he used to sit on the wings of a bulbul bird and fly out of Port Blair and come to the Indian mainland and come back. It meant that when he was seeing the birds chirping there or whatever, and they would fly, his thoughts, flights of fantasy would be that you're going back to the motherland, how fortunate you are, oh bulbul. But the way it came out was he was physically sitting on the bulbul and flying up and down, and that became a subject of so much ridicule, including on social media. I think the other word for Sangi these days is bulbul boys. So, does that do any benefit to the legacy of Savarkar, or does it do more harm? It caricaturizes him so much more and all the hard work done to resurrect his actual thing is just wiped away, because these are more popular media than books. So I think the onus of responsibility is so much higher on these filmmakers that they are portraying things accurately. The Attenborough film on Gandhi should be like the benchmark. They didn't over romanticize, sensationalize anything. Things were shown as they were. Of course, it was with an agenda to show Gandhi as the greatest, but it was still a very well made frame-to-frame film on his life, and subtlety, including the way the tint in his glitter in his eyes, or the pathos when he sees Kasturba dying, or when he sees that peasant in Champaran dying, and so on. These were tiny moments of intense emotion which they showed well. I think Indian filmmakers need to learn some of that subtlety, and then it will make, especially since they have the responsibility of bringing Savarkar's legacy on celluloid for eternity, and particularly for the younger generation. I hope they adhere to facts and authenticity as much as possible.
Talking about popular consciousness, do you think when the Prime Minister of the country visits the cellular jail and, pays his regards to the, sacrifices that the likes of Savarkar and Savarkar himself have made for the cause of this nation, how do you think that plays out in the minds of especially the youngsters?
Immense role, because you have the head of state, the going there and paying his respects. Remember, the cellular jail was something that Nehru's government wanted demolished because they didn't want anyone to even commemorate the memories of all the revolutionaries who were housed there. Not a single congressman was ever jailed in Kala Pani. It was always only the revolutionaries, the Sashastra Kranti, who were put there, largely from Bengal, some from Maharashtra, United Provinces, Tamil Nadu, and all these other places. So contrast that to now, when the Prime Minister of India is going there, sitting, in reverence at Savarkar's cell. There were several others, Sachindranath Sanyal, Ulaskar Dutt, Indu Bhushan Roy, Barin Ghosh, many others who were there at that time. The Gadar movement, a lot of detainees from there, all of them. So it was indirectly a tribute to all of them. And why only him going now? We had the G20, delegates who went to the Port Blair, to the cellular jail. So from a time when the government of India wanted to demolish it, to the time when your international delegates are being taken there and shown that as an important symbol in the history of your freedom struggle, I think it's a huge difference, and that obviously rubs on the psyche of youngsters. And I honestly feel that the Port Blair, it should be made like a pilgrimage spot, this Kalapani jail, for all Indians, particularly students. Compulsorily from schools, I think children should be taken as part of field trips from history to go to Kalapani, spend time in that cellular jail, and understand, just stand there and look at the names of all those people whose names are etched there on the walls as to who are the people who were jailed there. And just pay a tribute that thanks to their sacrifices of their lives in most cases, that you and I are breathing in free India today. Least we can do is, look at them with gratitude. Right. So most children, youngsters, they don't even know that such a place exists or haven't gone there. So I think it should be commemorated a lot more.
Yeah. Talking about that, I mean, one of the most common, or I should say popular, criticisms of Savarkar is that he pleaded mercy, lived on British pension, and that's just used as an axe to dismiss any other part of what he was. So how do you really address that, or what's the history behind it?
Wow, that's like that will take 2-3 podcasts in itself. No, it's a horrible trope, because these, I don't even call them mercy petition, they were petitions. In Hindi mein yachika. So everybody who were jailed there, the political prisoners, they had the agency of a petition which was made available to them at different points of time. So when the First World War started, or when the First World War ended, when there was a royal proclamation, when the capital of India shifted from Calcutta to Delhi, when Emperor George came to Delhi for the Delhi Darbar, at all these times, out of goodwill, political prisoners would be let out in batches, and to be let out you had to file a petition. And so because they need to know who are the people who are waiting in the next batch to be released. So like this, a lot of people would file petitions and they would be released. And Savarkar, as a student of law, he knew the loopholes of law, and so his constant, in my first book volume, Echoes from a Forgotten Past, I've actually listed all the petitions in the appendix. Most of the Marxist historians selectively quote from these petitions, whereas if you look at all of them, nowhere is there this thing for apology or whatever. It always says clarify our positions. Are we a common convict who are also housed in cellular jail, accused of rape and murder and theft and all that? Hardcore criminals, or are we political prisoners? If we are political prisoners world over, we are given some decent treatment. Here, no food, no toilet facilities, kolhu ka bell, punishment all day, no medical facilities even if you're falling ill, electrocution, all whiplashes. So don't treat us like that. Have some decency. So we can't write letters to our family. Once in 1.5 years you can write a letter. You can meet your family members once a year. No pen and paper given to do anything. No books and newspapers to read. So clarify our position, give us those facilities, give us remission. So that's what his petitions were largely about. And he was also acting as a spokesperson for the other prisoners, who were all young men in their teens or early 20s who didn't know English. So they would look up to him as Bada Babu, and someone who's come from England, who knows English law, and he would be like their spokesperson. So in the 1917 petition, which no one quotes, he says in one place that if my name constitutes an obstacle in the release of all the other prisoners, you can delete my name and release the others, and that would give me as much happiness as my own release would. So very clearly he was acting as a spokesperson for all the other semi-literate young prisoners. And there are so many other examples when the British Home Officer Reginald Craddock comes all the way to Port Blair to interview some of the prisoners. He has an interview even with Savarkar, and in his official jottings he says, I interviewed this man and he shows no remorse or repentance for what he has done. And releasing him would be very dangerous because it would inflate the revolutionary movement in the Bombay presidency, which we have tried to clamp down. So there are British records, there are people of his own time saying that. Sachindranath Sanyal in his autobiography, Mera Bandi Jeevan, he also says the same, that I also wrote a petition. हूँ बहू वैसे ही तरह जिस तरह सावरकर जी ने लिखा था, और उनके आदेश पे उनको रिलीज कर दिया गया. बट I was released, but he was detained, and the reason is also because he was a dangerous or D category, dangerous category criminal. And there were 2 years ago there was this furor when the defense minister said something about this, that Gandhiji told Savarkar's younger brother to file a petition, which is true. I mean, by then he had already filed 2-3 petitions. But in 1920, Narayan Rao Savarkar, the younger brother, said both the elder brothers have been languishing in Kalapani for such a long time. He goes to Gandhi and pleads, saying, you are very popular with the British, so can you please help us and plead for their release? And Gandhi says, ask your brothers to file a petition. And he also makes a case for it in his magazine by writing a long letter saying they are courageous, patriotic young men. They now want to give up this violent means and come to constitutional reforms because Morley-Minto reforms had kicked in. So if petitioning was such a bad thing, then Gandhiji himself would not have suggested to do that. So taking all of this into account, that's how we need to look at it in perspective. And Savarkar spent 14 years in jail and 13 years in house imprisonment in Ratnagiri. So 27 years of a young man's life who had gone to London to be trained as a barrister, snuffed out. And those 13 years in Ratnagiri, it was initially only 5 years. Now, every time it came up for review, they said, and I quote the actual records of the British in my second volume, A Contested Legacy, where every 2 years they would say, he can't be trusted, so let's continue the captivity. So if he had turned on to their side or he had sold his soul, they would not keep him in house arrest. And this pension business also, it was a common feature then to give allowance. It was not pension, it was an allowance which was given for revolutionaries who were released from these places. So 60 rupees that he got was only between the time 1929, actually he was released in 1924, 5 years they didn't even give him, 1929 to 1937 when he was completely released. Those 8 years they gave him 60 rupees. His degrees was taken away. His the Ferguson College where he did his bachelor's, that degree, the law degree was taken away. He did not have an option to practice law, though he was a bona fide barrister. No sources of livelihood. He came from a zamindar family and his entire property had been confiscated. When he and his brother were put in jail, the women of the family literally had to beg for earning a living, because even the utensils and vessels of the family were pawned and auctioned. So how does a person survive? It was a growing family. So for such people, the British used to give this allowance fee. And even Gandhi in his 1942, almost 500 rupees a month or something was the allowance that was being given. And these are documents from the National Archives of India, which when I make it public, people make a big furor and fuss. But that is the fact. Now based on that, to say he was sold out for 60 rupees, why does one need to get sold out? He was an intelligent man. He was trained in law. He could speak English. He could write so well. The British would have co-opted him into the system. In history, I think everything comes with a context. Yes. And unless you take it in context, out of context you can quote anything and prove anything. But you have to see all the facts in a holistic manner. And then I think samagra picture comes. Yes.
So I mean, when I was researching about Savarkar pleading innocence, and then other revolutionaries or other freedom fighters, and whether or not they sought apology from the British. One example that I came across was how Motilal Nehru sought an apology for his son Jawaharlal Nehru 12 days after he was jailed. Do you think history writers have been very selective with what they show and how they project.
Indeed, yeah. In the Nabha prison, that's the episode where I think in a few days, Jawaharlal Nehru's, tolerance was completely broken because, and his fellow prisoner writes, I forget his name right now, a South Indian, who writes about this whole, that Jawaharlal was so restless that he had to sleep on the floor and all that. And so that's when Motilal Nehru goes to the Viceroy and ensures that they give an undertaking that we'll never enter Nabha again. And that's when he's released. So he could pull the strings and actually go and plead with the Viceroy to release, get his son released. So that's another thing. A lot of other, people never got that opportunity. Yeah. And even among the revolutionaries, as I said, all these other people, whether it was Barindranath Ghosh and Sachindranath Sanyal, all of them wrote the same petition. Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan and others who were, jailed in the Kakori case in UP. They wrote petitions through Madan Mohan Malviya and they did not get released, but petitions were made. So it was a very, very general practice. So being selective or being malafide about it, that is the problem when it comes to, if you're writing it with a motive, then it's problematic.
Cool. Given your objective lens, tell me, how has the history of the recent Indian past, or let me say the immediate past, what do you think would be the major highlights? What really has changed in the past 10 years?
An important thing I would say is, I think, this process of decolonization that you've mentioned, where of course all the other things I'm not even getting into, the the economic progress or the military might. These things are, as I said, it's inevitable once a country gains political freedom. And it's a laudable thing, all the welfare schemes, measures, all those type of things, which is good, and are going up on the size of the economy, etc. But the third dimension of colonial subjugation, of the mind, of the intellect, of your culture, of not even having respect for your own selves, your own identity, that is slowly beginning to change, and largely also driven by efforts of the government of the day. So many small things, I mean, they may appear as small, but in the long run, each of them adds up to a lot of things. Like, for instance, right in Delhi, there's no Raja, so why is the need to have a Rajpath? You have a Kartavya Path, and there you have the statue of the man who displaced Emperor George V. It was the heroics of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army which eventually got us freedom. So not commemorating him in the manner that he deserves to be, I think was very unfair to him. So giving him that pride of place right there, having the insignia of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj on the Navy, flag. Why should you have the cross? When other countries, including Pakistan, doesn't have that on their Navy, why should we in India have the same thing? And a beating retreat need not be with Abide With Me and some Scottish hymn like that. You have "Ae Mere Watan Ke Logon," sung by our very own Bharat Ratna Lata ji. So why not have that as your... So reclaim your own thing. Everything that they imposed on you, you don't have to blindly, take that forward. So a lot of these small things that have been done in the last few years, I think in the long run, they will prove to be it'll lead to a new churn. So when there's a lot of conversation around Netaji or about Shivaji's Maharaj's emblem on the Navy flag, people are going to be curious about it, read about it a little more. Just this week we had this whole Sengol.
Yes, I was coming to that.
So yeah, who knew about this thing?
Tell us about it.
Well, without even going into what happened in 1947, etc. One is, for the longest time, the Chola Empire, which ruled for almost 1,000 years, and so, and the Pandya, the Chera, a lot of kingdoms in the south. The Sengol itself, it comes from the Tamil word semmai, which means, righteous or righteousness and coal or a stick. So the stick of righteousness or the Rajdand, which was passed on from one king to the other as a transfer of authority to the other. The Rajguru would give it to the next person who was crowned. And in so many these things, I mean, it was like the conscience keeper of the ruler. So in so many Tamil stories and novels, etc., each time the Sengol moves this way or that way, if the Raja took a unjust decision, so it kept you in check. In Silappadikaram and all these Kannagi's story, there are references to how this thing actually moved when he took an unjust this one of killing Kannagi's husband and so on. So it was always a conscience keeper of the ruler. So of course today the criticism is this is not a monarchy, this is not all of that. But I think the symbolism of it in 1947, if the entire episode, that it was given to Nehru was an undeniable fact, as the Adhinams have mentioned in there.
Who are Adhinams?
So these are these Shaivite mutts in Tamil Nadu, which who interestingly, I mean, all those on social media who keep blaming them as Brahminical, this thing, they are the non-Brahmin, the groups, the mutts there, who all claim their their philosophy, their lineage from the various Tamil Shaivite saints of the past. And so these people gave that particular thing to Nehru, and so it very interestingly was a transfer of power that way to a very Hinduized kind of India. Before he took oath on the constitution, it became a republic. So the very fact that there was symbolism, there was rituals involved in it, and it was a link to the past. Today he may not be a ruler, the prime minister is not the king, so it is not as if every day he is going to sit with it or whatever, but it is there as a symbol to show that dharma, which does not translate to religion, it is righteousness, justice for all, is what is going to be the conscience, the guiding force. Everyone has to have that as the guiding force. I think it's a very nice thing. And across the world, scepters are used. We saw that in the Prince Charles, King Charles III's coronation and all of that recently. This is not a coronation, but that's why it's put next to the speaker, where it is, I think, a symbol of our civilizational roots. As we spoke earlier today, the clash in India is between these two ideas of India. If India, on the one group which will say that India was born on 15th August 1947, and the other which says India is a civilization which far predates that particular date. For the first group, everything is only about the constitution, and the natural heroes then become only Gandhi and Nehru and all of that, who helped in creating this on 15th August. Everything else is peripheral. But for the other group who say, it's 5,000 years old, the Gandhi-Nehru constitution are one phase in this large, glorious history, a very important phase, but it's not the only thing. There are many other things from the past we can take inspiration from, and this is a continuum. And the constitution too cannot be a complete abiding document. It has drawn from the civilization. It is not as if it has come out of thin air.
Right.
Our constitution is a byproduct of our civilization. The very fact that the constitution makers did not seem it necessary to have the word secular in it speaks a lot that they knew that inherently our civilization is secular. It's accepting. Tolerance is a bad word. I don't like you, so I tolerate you. But here I accept everything. We have different viewpoints, but we can still live together. That's what our philosophy has been. So our constitution, on the founding pages, you have pictures of Ram, of the Bhagavad Gita, all these things there on the pages. Today, that would also be called a communal document by those who would, berate it. So I think this clash between these two ideas of India, was it 15th August or was it a timeless civilization? This clash is what is going on now. And now the other group is having a upper hand, where we are actually claiming that not that we disrespect 15th August or the Constitution, but we have a larger thing to glorify, to feel proud of, and get inspiration from.
So, talking about civilizational heritage, we've spoken previously about our common shared interests on classical music. You're trained in Carnatic classical music. Leaving the music piece aside, what more do you think one can learn from such traditional methods of training which are rooted in Indian culture?
No, as you know, I mean, any classical art, why do we call it sadhana? Like in a spiritual practice, it is sadhana. It's not something you go and train in a few weeks or a few months or go to a university setup and learn. But it's a lifelong journey, and it teaches you so many things. It teaches you the patience of the virtues of patience, of discipline, of rigor, of being focused about certain things. Whether you, and I'm sure you would also relate to that, that your own classical training would have brought in your life a lot of focus in whatever you do. You may not even pursue music later or whatever, but the very upbringing, it rewires you in such a way that I think it makes you so much, when you're doing something, you're completely focused on that particular aspect, and there's no shortcut there. It has to come through hard work, through patience, perseverance, repeated failures, but overcoming them to finally succeed. So I think a lot of these aspects and the softer elements, as we have that famous Sanskrit verse that those who do not have the gifts of Sangeet and Sahitya are worse than Pashus, just that they don't even have the horns and the tail. So I think the finer aspects of life, whether it's literature or the arts, they refine person's outlook to life, and that's why it's so important to include these in some form in the curriculum for children. They may not grow up to become Lata Mangeshkars and Ravi Vermas in painting, but at least an exposure to that, at least an kind of understanding, which is what incidentally the new education policy does. And I was fortunate to contribute that particular chapter to its writing, where on the importance of the arts in education and why it must be included. And world over, I was a part of this United Nations body called ISME, International Society for Music Education. They've done so much of research on the fact that especially children with special education needs, dyslexia, ADHD, all these things, children, if they are taught through music, their grasping power actually improves. There are scientific studies to show that, which has been documented by the West. It's not done in India, unfortunately, but outside there is a lot of matter on that. And also other normative children too, who if they are taught science or difficult things, mathematics or something through music, through the retention, particularly at that age, is a lot more. So it's not necessary that all of them need to be trained to become a performer, but the influence of the arts, theatre, dance, movement, painting, music, I think all of this adds a very rich texture to one's life. And we shouldn't deny our children. One of the sustainable development goals of the United Nations is that a holistic improvement, development of a child. And in that, the arts play a very critical role. And I'm glad finally the government of India has recognized after 75 years that these are important elements. Just rote learning or IQ, increasing IQ is not important. There is only important, but there is a EQ and more importantly an SQ, an emotional quotient and a spiritual quotient. And in both of that, I think India has everything to offer, not only to us but the whole world.
Right. Since you fell into the trap and mentioned the national educational policy, give me a key takeaway. What's the major highlight to you?
I think the important part is lessening the burden on children, which is what amount of unnecessary information that is put in for children to read, and also the whole this whole inclusion of the arts in the curriculum in some format. The devil is in the details, so we need to see how these are going to be implemented when the NCF takes full shape and the new textbooks and all those come, but at least the intent is seen here. and the whole fact that things will be taught in the regional languages, in the mother tongue. Slowly, along with English, we need to develop alternate, models for communication, even in the technical space. But for that to happen, just an intent is not important, and that's where I think Savarkar's life also is an inspiration, where he did this entire work on Bhasha Shuddhi. To cleanse Marathi language, which had been corrupted with a lot of influence from foreign, words, Arabic, Persian, and all which had come in. So you need to create vocabulary first. How do you teach a child medicine or physics and mathematics in Hindi or Odia unless you have words? Are you just going to say proton and electron which are English words only in Oriya script, or is there going to be a special word for that which you need to create? Will the language get enriched, or it's just writing an English word in native script? So Savarkar had created so many new words. So things like Digdarshak, Mahapaur for a municipal, all these Doordarshan, they were all actually inventions of him. He coined those words, saying unless you have the new words, you will not be able to have the confidence in your own language. So I think the NEP is a great window of opportunity, which will help us not only in just technical education in Indian languages, but if it is done in the right way and with the right experts, I think it can enrich and make our languages grow a lot more. Because once you have medical terms in that particular language, then that language becomes a live, more living language. Rather than, of course, literature, writing poems, novels, and all of that is very important. But if you're teaching also in these languages, it needs to find a vocabulary of its own, and so it gives, that way the NEP gives us the opportunity to make our languages more thriving than what they already are.
Right. I mean, talking about NCERT books, of course it's a heated debate and we will not get into it. What I want to ask is, why would there be so much of an objection, say from the left-leaning ecosystem towards writing a more complete version of Indian history, a more objective version that acknowledges contributions of, freedom fighters and heroes across the board? Why would they object to it?
No one understands, because I don't know. As I said, the thrust of these books have somehow, as I said, to look at India very self-loathingly, without, every society has its fair share of failures, ups and downs, and all of that. But we overemphasize only on the negative aspects. We don't focus on the positives,
on the
unifying features or factors, or the reasons for which, as I said, we can be genuinely proud of. Instead, we keep berating ourselves all the time. As that friend of mine said, that if you read those books, you'll start hating India. So today that is changed, and as I said, only one. You learn there are so many chapters on the Mughal history and all of that, whereas Ahoms or South Indian kingdoms are not even listed, or people don't talk about it. The counter to that is not like what is happening now, let's remove the Mughals from the you can't wish away your history, whether it's good or bad, whether you like it or not. Someone who's ruled has ruled. So a more balanced, inclusive, and people's history also. It's not just a litany of only rulers and kings and queens. It's also people's history, cultures, languages, traditions. All of this needs to be a very holistic view that involves a lot of hard work, and it cannot be agenda driven. It is not ideological. I think it's a very generic document on what India has done in the past, in so many thousands of years of her existence. So that is something that people are averse to doing, and you'd rather perpetuate the agenda with which you've set out on.
Right. Talking about the immediate past, how do you think Prime Minister Modi has impacted the recent Indian history in post-independent India?
I think the main contribution, I would say, is in reviving this entire, decolonial narrative to our history, to be able to take pride in several of these things, and to be unapologetic about owning your own traditions. Even in Britain or US, where the Prime Minister there or the President would take an oath on the Bible, or but still that doesn't make it any less of a secular democratic republic. So if 80% or whatever the percentage of India is Hindu, and the Hindu civilization is the dominant texture, the flavor of this country, owning it doesn't mean you are less secular, or that need not be a threat to any other group or community. You can own it, at the same time be very inclusive and very embracive of all other faiths. And Hindu by its very nature is inclusive. As we discussed earlier, there were different schools of philosophy, and everyone coexisted. They tried to convince one another through the strength of their arguments, but it was never forceful imposition. There was no conversion, proselytization through the sword, bringing another person to your viewpoint. So we've always been inclusive, and so I think that aspect is something that's coming out in the recent past, where the Prime Minister goes and participates in very overtly religious events, which is perfectly fine for him to do. At the same time, that doesn't mean he or the government is anti a particular community. You can be both. You can own your heritage, your civilization with pride, at the same time be inclusive, especially in a case like ours, where inherently we are embracive and accepting of everybody. So I think that is one of the most important things. Of course, I would have wished that the history textbooks would be changed faster and probably more efficiently than what it already has. The process has probably begun, but it should have been done much faster and in a more better manner.
Talking about this balancing art and history, how do you think one could balance between writing history that promotes national integration, because that's one of the justifications that's given to the way history of post-independent India was written, vis-a-vis accepting history with the facts, with the way that it is, because we have the Holocaust case, which is for us to see and learn from.
Yeah. No, that's a very warped way of looking at our past, and I think that was I understand where it came from, that this country was born in 1947 out of partition, the new country of India, the Republic, a partition that was caused on religious communal lines, and there was large scale, as we know, bloodshed, violence, loss of lives and property and all of that. So in the aftermath of that, maybe the founders of this republic felt, particularly in telling some of these stories of the past, all the uncomfortable aspects should be brushed under the carpet. They should not be emphasized, because somehow it's going to upset today's social cohesion. But I don't accept that at all, especially now after so many decades of independence, where these are schisms of the past. Just as if you have a wound, it needs to be healed, it needs to be cured. Only then you can move forward. Otherwise, if under the bandage, if it is still there, I think it slowly turns into cancer. So it shouldn't continue to fester there like that. It needs to heal. We've not allowed that healing process. And what is the first step of healing is to just say the truth, acknowledge it, dehyphenate, I keep saying this all the time, dehyphenate today's communities from all the atrocities of the past. A young Muslim man or woman today in India is not responsible for the invasions of Ghori and Ghazni and Tipu Sultan and Aurangzeb and their atrocities and all of that. But the converse is also not true. That we need to tell a lot of the young people that they are not your heroes. A lot of people valorize these invaders. They still go to the mazars of Aurangzeb, political parties included, go and pay respects there for a man who was a marauder like him. So we need to make it very clear who the nation's heroes and villains are. And if national integration has to happen, everyone needs to be on the same page. My hero cannot be your villain and vice versa. We all need to be on the same
Common
page
heroes,
on that. Yeah.
Common values.
Yeah. And this whole idea that somehow people today will get upset, I think that's very warped. Why should you link the comfort or the patriotism or the loyalty of today's communities with all these faces? If you want syncretic examples, you will have from Ras Khan to Rahim to Dara Shikoh to APJ Abdul Kalam to Arif Muhammad Khan Sahab. So many of them are there. Why do you need to emphasize on these barbarians, whitewash their crimes and show them as some paragons of virtue, which they are not? And I think, the edifice of national integration cannot rest on the shaky foundations of whitewashed history. And so just a little breeze is enough to shake the foundations and the whole building will come crashing. And that is why we constantly have strifes, we have social tensions, renaming towns, cities, that project, the Ram Janmabhoomi project, or now Mathura, Kashi, what is happening with the Gyanvapi. Somewhere this truth and reconciliation which
process hasn't happened in India.
What happened in South Africa with Desmond Tutu and the whole Ubuntu, where they said, I forgive. Here the victim and the perpetrator, they're not alive. The two people to see eye to eye and say, I'm sorry and I forgive you or whatever. Here it's a civilizational wound, it's intergenerational trauma, which is going on from, our great-great-grandfathers who have probably suffered all of this. So somewhere acknowledging that, and as you mentioned, Holocaust museums across the world don't commemorate the Holocaust.
Right.
They are a reminder to you that these
this is
horrific,
the past
horrific
that
things,
to be repeated.
These horrific things happened, and that is when we know it and we remember it. That's when we'll ensure that it will never happen again. I think that is what we need to do in this country, rather than pretend that it never happened. Make fables and stories to the contrary to prove a case, and worse, to put the entire onus of national integration on this fabrication of history to make some communities in India today feel secure. So we talk openly of the atrocities of the East India Company. No one thinks that that's going to make the Christians of India feel bad, right? I mean, the Christians don't associate with the East India Company. So why should the Muslims of India identify with Aurangzeb or with Babur, who came from outside?
And probably that's just an assumption,
Yeah, and from the political end, when it keeps being enforced, a lot of them also start believing in that supremacy. So that is very dangerous to hyphenate them with that. If at all, what we should do is to remove them from that and say, just like what Indonesia is a Muslim majority country, but still they have the Ram Leela, they have the Garuda, they have all icons of their Hindu past, Saraswati and everything being celebrated. You can be whatever by your faith, but culturally, the Hindu culture and the roots, even of communities here, they are all converted from their original Hindu pool. So what is wrong in acknowledging and respecting that, even as you pursue your own faith with all the freedom and all the independence that the Constitution and the modern Indian Republic gives to you?
Right. Finally, do you think that history is increasingly becoming more relevant in the modern times? You must be meeting so many young people. So many of them hear your podcast. Do you think people really want to know where they're coming from, what their roots are? Is that why people are so interested in learning about history now?
Yeah, I think so, because I see this as a new trend. I think for some time, if you remember, there was one period when I think mythology, our tales, our epics, they were the flavor of the season. So you had writers like Amish Tripathi and Ashwin Sanghi, and at some point even, when initially he started writing Devdutt Patnaik and others, they brought an interest in all of this back. Now history seems to be the flavor of the season. And the reason for that is finally the young people are realizing that, hey, something has been hidden from us. Something has been told wrongly to us. And I think since the days of Adam and Eve, the forbidden fruit is always the most tasty one. No? Whatever you deprive someone of, the mind will naturally want more of that. So if you've been told that what you've learnt is not the entire truth, there are other aspects to it, I think there is a lot more interest, particularly among young people. And mediums like this, the podcast that we are doing, other podcasts that I normally go to, I think that's the best way to connect to a lot of youngsters who may not be having the patience to read my 1000-page, 2-volume book on Savarkar, but these tidbits that we talk of, I think those are more educative, and maybe after listening to 1 hour, 2 hours of our buck that we do here, maybe 10% of the listeners are inspired to go and read those books, buy those books, read them, and they say, hey, this sounds like interesting stuff, why don't I dive deeper?
Right.
Otherwise, at the surface level, some information is better than no information. So that way, I think it does a great deal of good to a lot of people.
Right. So, concluding at what's next? Which is your next book, and when do we get to read that?
Well, too many projects in the pipeline, but for now, I'm writing a very exhaustive biography of both Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, because I think these were two very important characters who again intrude today's contemporary politics. So I think it's important to understand all ramifications, that these were finally characters of grey, slotting X or Y as extreme of good or bad is incorrect. The centrist space that you spoke of. So it was this balanced perspective that I plan to evaluate both father and son, and hopefully towards the end of the year it should be ready, and maybe next year is when the book should be out for people to read.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sampath, for taking out this time and taking us through this long journey of Indian history. So here we come to the end of our second long episode. Hope you got a chance to learn a lot and got a good snapshot into Indian history. For our next episode, we choose a very different flavor, and that is upcoming trends in India's entrepreneurship ecosystem. If there are other topics that you would like to learn more about or speakers you'd like to hear from, do let us know in the comment section, and keep following us on the New India Junction YouTube channel. Goodbye.